Well, thank you, David. It really is a pleasure to be here for this panel on quantum technologies and its impact on national security. Quantum is said to be a veritable game changer when it comes to the future of conflict, particularly in the areas of sensing, timing, computation, and security. Largely because quantum itself and the technology it's spawning is so different than other more classical science and technologies. To be sure, as national security leaders have become more aware of the leap ahead advantages quantum technologies can bring in establishing and maintaining military superiority against a peer adversary, they become increasingly interested in learning more about how to harness, integrate, and scale these technologies for maximum effect. That's what we intend to talk about here today as we dive into a deeper understanding of quantum and its implications on national security with my special guest, Laura Thomas, the Chief of Staff and Strategic Initiatives at quantum technology and manufacturing company Infleqtion. Laura has served over 18 years in national security and leadership roles, working extensively across industry, the U.S. intelligence community, National Security Council, U.S. Department of State, U.S. Department of Defense, Congress, and with foreign partners. Dr. Joel Mozer recently retired as the Director, Science, Technology, and Research for United States Space Force and Chief Scientist, United States Space Force and Space Operations Command. Lieutenant General Harry Raduege, who served in uniform for more than 36 years in a number of senior positions across the Air Force and Joint Force, and was a previous director at the Defense Information Systems Agency. General Raduege has been an executive leader, board director, and senior consultant in industry to a number of organizations where he has continued to help those organizations understand how to leverage emerging technologies like quantum to advance and secure our national security capabilities and those of our allies. Thank you all for joining me here today. We're going to start with you, Laura, and ask you to help us to sort of set the stage on what is quantum. Can you give us an overall explanation of quantum technologies in a simple way to help our listeners appreciate its significance?
Yeah, that's actually a very hard question because quantum is one of the hardest sciences that's out there. And, even PhD physicists still have challenges in explaining quantum today. But at the fundamental, core, quantum is about how things behave at the atomic level, the level of atoms. And that's very different than how things behave at a much larger macro level. We see a car going through the street. It's an object that's moving at a certain velocity. But when you break it down into individual atoms, they behave quite differently. And quantum is really about harnessing individual atoms in order to do things that we've just not been able to do previously. But at the same time, quantum, it sort of conjures this idea that it's a very far future technology, but it's been around for quite some time. And there are things today that we have, like MRIs, that are based on quantum technology. So it's really not new, but there are newer applications that are being used, especially on the national security side. So a great example there would be quantum atomic clocks. Now, atomic clocks have been around for a very long time as well, but there are newer types of clocks that we're developing that are much smaller, much higher performance, and very resilient, durable, that can be used in battlefield type scenarios. And that's really when we start to think about quantum enabled warfare, for example, where quantum is going. And that really is a fairly near term, next 3 to 5 years. It's not a far horizon that you often hear when you hear just quantum computing.
Thank you, Laura. Joel, based on that and some of these the different nature of quantum technology, this idea of quantum-enabled warfare that Laura introduced and some of the applications we're going to dive into a little bit more deeply later, but based on Laura's introductory comments about quantum itself, what do you see as some of the national security implications of this technology?
Well, thank you, Cam, and thanks for inviting me to be on this. And I am one of those PhD physicists that has trouble explaining quantum physics and how quantum technologies apply. They're very non-intuitive, so it's not a simple situation at all. But there's really three different areas that we look at when we talk about quantum technology. There's quantum sensing, there's quantum communications, and there's quantum computing. And there are various levels of maturity. So let me start with the quantum sensing, because as Laura mentioned, we've had atomic clocks flying around since the 70s, and the United States Space Force operates a constellation of these clocks called the GPS system. And so it's not necessarily new technology, but it is definitely an evolving field. Quantum sensors have sensitivities to detect things like electromagnetic fields or magnetic fields or gravity fields or acceleration, like no other sensors we've ever been able to harness before. So the national security implications of those things are pretty high. As our adversaries have the ability to jam our GPS signals, we need to replace that positioning, navigation, and timing capability with other capabilities. So the ability to have local clocks that can keep very precise time allows us to get away from some of those vulnerabilities. The ability to sense the magnetic field very, very finely gives us an alternative way to do navigation. We can sense the structure of the magnetic field, and we have it pre-mapped around the globe. We can tell where we are just based on that. And so things like that are emerging technologies that in a quantum-enabled warfare the military will depend on. And they're here today. Those are technologies that are maturing right now. So over the next 5 years, we'll see a lot of those things. The second one I'll talk about is the quantum communications. And this one, by the way, is probably the one that China invested in the most. Is some of the physics of quantum entanglement are appealing in that one might think that you can communicate in a way that's unhackable, that physically somebody can't eavesdrop on you. And there's a lot of investment going in there. Actually, that's not such a big area for the United States right now. In fact, the National Security Administration recommends against some of those technologies like quantum key decryption because of the additional risks and things that propose. So I'll set that one aside for now. The third one is quantum computing, which Laura mentioned. And that one's a lot more further off than certainly quantum sensing. There's a lot of progress and exciting news these days about quantum computers. IBM just last month announced their latest computer that has over 1,000 qubits or quantum bits, which is, just in 2019, I'm sorry, they announced the first quantum computer that had 20 qubits. So they've increased by nearly 2 orders of magnitude over 4 years. So, but before that's useful, we're going to have to see millions or maybe even tens or hundreds of millions of qubits. So that may be off in the future. But the national security implications of that are that quantum computers could decrypt using things like Shor's algorithm to factor big prime numbers, could decrypt our current encryption standards. So the national security imperative there is to develop and implement post-quantum encryption capability today, so that when that time comes of computers that can decrypt them, we're prepared. So those are just a few of the national security implications. A lot deeper in each one of those.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mozer. General Raduege, I'd like to get your take on this. I mean, you have been an important voice in the national security community for a long time, certainly when you were in uniform and definitely in the years since. You have walked the halls, you continue to stay connected to the leaders around all of the national security organizations in the U.S. And internationally. Should we be taking this seriously at this time? I mean, is this a capability that is on the minds of the leadership? And in your perspective, Is this something that we really need to spend more time on from a policy standpoint, from an architectural or an integration standpoint? Or are we still kind of looking far out into the future before we can take advantage of these technologies?
Yeah. Well, the short answer, in my opinion, is that quantum technologies are becoming more real every day. Interestingly, about 5 years ago, I was asked to give a speech, and it was at a quantum summit in Toronto, Canada. And interestingly, the title of my talk was Quantum Computing and National Security Considerations. Now, again, this is 5 years ago. And at that time, one distinguished professor who was there predicted that it might actually be 5 to 10 years before any of these quantum machines that we were talking about that day would have the capacity and the accuracy to solve useful problems. So here we are today, standing at the 5 years down point at that projected time frame. And at that Toronto summit, also, and this kind of reflects on what Joel just said just a minute ago, IBM was also there. And their lead scientist noted that they had been doubling the power of their quantum computers since 2017. That's now been more than 6 years. And one thing seems sure, however, today we find ourselves ready to face new and major foundational type changes in the basis of global information processing. In other words, we're really moving from the digital world to the quantum world. And being a guy that came through the analog world and worked into digital world, now we're moving on from digital to quantum. And I think that's one interesting way of thinking about it. And interestingly, earlier today, just today, from the World Economic Forum in Davos, a 5-step quantum security maturity index plan is being presented so that the world leaders there can begin thinking about their futures in a quantum world, where they're going to need to chart and measure their living and operating progress in an evolving quantum security world. Now, that's being presented to world leaders today at Davos. So, yes, is it real? Yes, and people are starting to get very serious about it now. One last thought. Although quantum technology is evolving quickly, I think we all realize that it's still in its very early stages of development.
Thanks so much, John Raduege. So it's real, yet somewhat nascent. Certain applications may be farther along than others. Sounds like from both Laura and Joel's comments that the computing side is maybe a little bit further out, specifically with regards to the computational ability to break all encryption. But Laura, this is what we often hear about. We often hear this bell ringer about a quantum computer's potential to break all encryption. Is that what we should be most concerned about right now? What's the likelihood of this?
Well,
if not this, then what?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's what drew me into the field. Very short story. I was CIA, I was an ops officer, so I was handling recruiting foreign assets, aka spies. And I went out one day to send an encrypted message, and I was with a tech person that I took along with me. And I asked, why do we think that this can't be broken? What is it about traditional encryption? And he gave me a very typical answer. It would take thousands of years for a computer to hack into this message. I said, well, what would challenge that assumption? He said, a quantum computer. I said, well, what's that? And he explained it, very basically to me, and said, well, do they exist yet? And should this be something that I'm worried about as I'm handling assets? And he said, well, we just don't know when it'll be possible. It could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 20 or never. And I said, well, that sounds like a real problem. I hope somebody's looking into that. And it's what set me on this journey and eventually joined Infleqtion as a quantum company. But now that I've been here a lot longer, look, quantum computing is still the holy grail. What capabilities that would unlock would just be, it is unfathomable for a country like the United States to come in second place to something like that. So is it important? Absolutely. Must we continue, the research and development that we're doing in quantum computing? 100%. Is it what we should be most concerned about now, breaking encryption? No. Should we be planting the seeds of how we could combat a future quantum computer, specifically by China, by switching over to post-quantum cryptography now? Yes, but from a concern standpoint, I'm more concerned that we're not getting the dominoes to fall in the right order. And the things that we need to be thinking about in quantum are not just the quantum computers themselves, but the complementary technology and the parts and pieces that you need to truly build the quantum ecosystem. And guess what? We don't have that all in the United States. A lot of it is offshore. But guess what country does have all of that within its borders when you start to break it down and think about what you need to really build these quantum systems? Well, it's China. And they can move so much more quickly than we can because they have military civil fusion. And, we don't want to be China to beat China, but they have a big leg up in their ability to commercialize. Now, they have some hindrances as well. In terms of innovation, you can't move very quickly in innovation when you have such a centralized system in many ways. But there's a lot of the first domino steps that we have to get right. And that goes back to supply chain, making sure that Department of Defense and the intelligence community are buyers, and that we actually start to, put these systems into production and not just, continually talk about them as R&D.
Mm, that's a really great point. Let's dive into that part of it a little bit here, because I do think that gets at the crux of the issue right in front of us. Joy, you've talked about many of these other applications of quantum technologies that are more mature. We've been doing clocks for some time. And these do bring certain advantages from a national security perspective. You've talked about the implications. But if we were to think about some of these kinds of applications that are probably the first ones that we would further advance when it comes to potentially the application of these technologies for alternative precision navigation and timing, for example. What do you think is going to draw the government to a broader application of this, and maybe even commercial uses to a broader application of these technologies in their ability to advance PNT, for example? And to Laura's point, how do we begin to move in that direction from an overall scalability standpoint?
Yeah, the great set of questions you ask, and lots of directions we could take this conversation. But it's a pretty exciting time, particularly from the quantum sensing perspective, and the fact that there's commercial companies that can produce small scale, small swap atomic clocks, and sensors are coming out of the laboratory and into demonstrations and applications. So a lot of very exciting things are going to happen as that goes on, as we start seeing more and more of these tools, these quantum tools, put into the hands of users and operators. We'll find more and more uses of them. I mean, just think of things like GPS. I mean, when we put it up, that was a military system for navigating ships at sea, and now it controls a $4 trillion a year economy, including Uber and everything else. So we're going to find applications for these things, and we need to be ahead of that. One of the things that I've seen throughout my career as a technologist is some of these emerging things that get promised that they're coming, they're right around the corner. Things like fusion energy or quantum computers we hear about them for a long time, and we can become a little bit disillusioned because it does take time for these things to mature. But once they sort of cross a threshold of where they become things that you can actually hold in your hand and use, that's when chaos and amazement and disruption happen. That's when the really surprising things come out of it. So we need to be in front of that curve and making sure that we're paying attention to the field. Quantum computers are not at all like classical computers. They're a very different thing. They solve a very different kind of problem. And we need to be thinking now of the types of problems. I mentioned Shor's algorithm that factors big numbers using quantum computers. That was developed by Peter Shor back in the 1990s, in 1994. So, mathematicians and folks doing algorithms have been thinking about how to apply algorithms to quantum computers for a long time. Once we have them, just imagine how many different applications. We can think about things like the merger of quantum computing and machine learning or artificial intelligence. That's not necessarily a thing right now. There's no particular field of merging those two, but it could be a breakthrough, something that gives us stepping stone to very much higher levels of general artificial intelligence. So we really need to be paying attention right now in the history of this sort of hinge of history moment when the technologies are coming out. And Laura's right. We need to be paying attention to things like supply chain and industrial base and people who have the education to deal with these things. All of those are things that are right here in front of us today from a national security perspective that we need to be paying attention to and taking very seriously.
Yeah.
Kim, if I could just add something to what Laura and Joel just mentioned. I'll tell you, when Laura mentioned earlier, and you brought up in your question about encryption being broken, this is the thing that stymied me and has concerned me and a lot of other people for quite some time. But, as things continue to evolve, we're starting to hear now about quantum-resistant algorithms that are now starting to be developed. And, networks in the future using quantum-style safe key distributions are now starting to be deployed. And that will be very important, to protect our most sensitive secrets. But that's going to take some time for sure.
Okay. Yeah, good. So a few more specific applications that more and more of us are becoming familiar with. This idea of quantum keys, quantum key distribution. Definitely seeing more discussion of that in terms of a commercialized capability. Joel talks about where we are with this hinge in history and the potential for quantum to be connected to other rapidly emerging technologies to further increase the competitive advantages that those technologies can provide on a force multiplying level. And yet the critical need to be aware of the fact that there's limited, if any, supply chain to support some of these things, even though we're starting to see some of them in the early stages of deployment. So what gives, Laura? How do we begin to think about transitioning out of the lab into the field, into operations? What's going to be needed from the government? What's going to be needed from commercial industry? How do we start to move this out into transitioning these technologies into commercial use?
Yeah, well, just a greater sense of urgency is absolutely needed. When you think about the next war, assuming that it would be with China, GPS could be obsolete. They're going to take out GPS capabilities. So when we think about really transitioning this technology into the field, that's a great use case of, how do we make sure that we can still navigate and that we can still communicate if GPS is taken out? And one thing that is transitioning now are some of the work that, my company's doing with optical atomic clocks, basically clocks that are small enough. Eventually you start to hit cost curves where you get them cheap enough and small enough for the manufacturing that you start to create distributed timing networks and that you don't have to rely on GPS in the same way. That's critical. it's completely within the realm of fieldable within the next 3 years. The challenge is it's building out the manufacturing lines and consolidating the supply chain that you need to do it at scale. And that's where we really have to have a solid industrial policy. And it's very analogous if you look back to the days of the semiconductor era and what it really took to get semiconductors out of the lab and into the field was the US government was a big buyer, specifically Department of Defense. And I think that's where we are right now with quantum too. We need the government to step in and buy. Grants are great. I don't know of companies that necessarily wants to turn down a grant, but to really get the private capital off the sidelines, the government has to show a demand signal by buying. The private capital is there. The government can't just rely on private capital to fuel this all the way through, though.
Okay, so here's then a follow-up question that I'll pose for both Joel Raduege and Dr. Mozer. What's holding the government back? Both of you have worked in government. You've either worked in industry or you've worked around industry quite extensively. What is holding back the government officials from actively looking to experiment with, deploy, transition, and scale these technologies? Is there some gap in understanding? Is there some gap in communication collaboration? Is there something that the government's getting wrong about quantum? Is there something that quantum industry is getting wrong about government so that they're just not talking it on the same page? What's going on here? Joel Raduege, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Joel.
Well, thanks. I think that's you've asked a question that we ask ourselves all the time, repeatedly. I think quite often that what government officials often underestimate is how fast quantum actually could be developed in various applications by industry, given the right resources like people, money, and encouragement. I think about Oppenheimer projects and those types of things, that we can really get going in industry. On the other hand, I think the quantum industry officials often don't realize how, given a critical requirement or need, a government can move very quickly with incredible influence, power, and resources. And however, I guess I have to say that one big differentiator, however, between the government and industry is that government leaders in national security must deal with and make decisions that involve very significant stakes, human life, quite often. And if they choose wrongly, move too slowly, or do nothing at all, they have a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, one of our strengths in the Department of Defense is that we have processes for developing our force. So we come up with concepts and we study them and war game them and develop doctrine and strategy around them and then acquire them and field them. That's a strength because it gives us very robust capabilities. It's a weakness in that process takes a long time. Sometimes, when you get POM cycles involved in it, it can take many years. It can take 20 to 30 years to go from an idea to a fielded system. And in this world of advanced technology, accelerating technology that spreads around the globe faster than any time in history, we have to be able to find ways to not necessarily short circuit that robust process, but to find on-ramps for new technology that we can be more agile, get them into play more quickly. And that's, that's true for a lot of emerging technologies today. Quantum is one of them, but just think about artificial intelligence or space technologies or biotechnology and hypersonics. There's a lot of those that they're coming at us faster than our old systems can deal with. So for quantum, I think one of the challenges we have is because it's not here today, it's risky to invest in it, or at least the traditionalists or the force development folks that are doing things are averse to taking that risk. And we have to get beyond that, because we have to get in front of these technologies before adversaries get a hold of them. So just adopting a stronger risk posture, a more liberal risk posture in adopting these new technologies, and leveraging what industry is already investing in and putting out that demand signal will help. But it is a lack of a sense of urgency in some cases to get this done, because we're going to it was just a year ago that we saw ChatGPT appear on the stage, and just think about what we've done over the last year, and as a nation and as a society, kind of reacting to that transient, in terms of policy and technology. The same thing will happen in the field of quantum technology over time. We just need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, Joe, I would just follow up with over the last few years, I've been hearing also about how our adversaries are investing so much more, like 20 times what we're investing. So they're racing for the prize. And we have to be also aware of that and factor that into our thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would add to that. Colonel Boyd, the OODA loop sort of creator, said bureaucracies don't change absent a disaster. And do we really want to wait until there's a disaster, with China announcing some major advancement in quantum that, we just thought, it'll take them 5 years, 10 years, and then it comes out tomorrow. Where does that leave us? Are we really okay doing that? I don't think so. I don't think that's the world. That's not the world I want to live in. So, a lot of these technologies on the sensing side, there's still much to be done, and they're not so mature that you're going to instantly deploy them in a system where, a soldier's life or death could be on the line. But you could have redundant quantum sensors in platforms now to test and show and to give that demand signal. There is no quantum program of record right now. What we really need on the Department of Defense side is a service to step up and say, you know what, this is what we need. We see the prototypes. We see the vision. We know that you could get to these specs. And when you do, and if you do, we'll start to deploy them. And here's the roadmap for doing it. We don't have that roadmap.
That's a really good point. All of these points are good. Laura, you talked a little bit earlier about the supply chain, but you also talked about kind of these tangential capabilities that are going to be needed once we get beyond testing and experimenting, which I agree with you, it's absolutely critical. And to be able to do that alongside, some of our established capabilities is a good way to do it. But we still have to have some other capabilities in place, I would think, such that this new deployment of quantum capabilities can be scaled. What needs to happen in industry to prepare for a future that's going to leverage and advance quantum technologies?
Well, one thing is we need companies that are willing to plant a flag and support, the U.S. and its international security mission. And, they exist. I know they exist. I'm with one. There are others out there. So that, that's good. One challenge that the industry has is, there's a lot of hype in quantum too. And that can be good sometimes for going out and getting investment when you're painting the picture of what could be, what the future could entail. It can also, when it doesn't come to plan according to timescales predicted, that can backfire. And it can certainly backfire if you're talking to government officials and they just think that you're selling them on something rather than, truly trying to figure out the needs of the mission and how to support the warfighter or anyone, forward deployed. So, I think there's a reckoning that the industry itself sort of has to look inward and say, how much are we contributing to some of the misinformation about quantum in the hype cycles? How can we correct that? At the same time, companies, I think when you think about supply chain, they need to be really careful where they source their material. And it's not just, you can't ask a company to do that just based on national security concerns, because the company lives or dies by money coming in the door. Are they going to survive? Are they going to be able to make payroll? And if they can buy something in China that's 10 times cheaper than what they could buy it if they sourced it in the US, you're putting a company in a really hard position to say no, because it's either, buy in the US, spend a lot of extra money and go out of business, or buy potentially from China. So, but I do think we need companies who think about that a little bit more from the economic perspective, not just the national security perspective. At any point, supply chain coming out of China is so fragile, and it could just be cut off like that. So we need companies to really think deeply about their supply chains. But again, it goes back to, we need the government to be a good buyer and give that demand signal that will spur a lot of the commercial side of this market as well.
Are there critical gaps in the supply chain? And when it comes to trying to figure out how to manufacture these quantum capabilities for broad use, what are the limitations that exist that we have to overcome?
I mean, some of the supply chain is two guys in a garage in the US. When you think about trying to scale a technology in order to bring the costs down and build the manufacturing lines that you would need to truly bring down the size, two guys in a garage is not going to suffice. So yeah, that's a major challenge that we have to overcome. Laser technology is a big piece of it as well. Photonics. A lot of that, there's certainly a laser industry in the United States, but a lot of it is in Europe, and certainly there's quite a bit in China too. So it's about bringing all of these things together, consolidating them, at least in the United States. And from, at least my company's standpoint, of all of that, what do we need to do vertically in-house in order to control our own future? And it's, I think quite a lot.
Joel, what do you think some of the limiting factors are with regards to shoring up the supply chain, establishing effective means to mass produce capabilities for advanced quantum sensing or timing capabilities that might be on the nearer horizon?
Yeah, it's absolutely an issue that we need to deal with. And part of the, I wouldn't want to forget, Laura mentioned that we need a demand signal coming from government. So on our side, we need to be thinking through, again, doing the strategy, the wargaming, the playing out of concepts to figure out, what pieces do we need the most and soonest so that we can, go after those first and then look at the supply chain pieces. And I think absent that kind of demand signal, we're kind of fishing a little bit in the dark and trying to solve all problems at once. So that's something we can do that. And another piece related to supply chain and manufacturability, a lot of this is engineering problems that the physics has been worked out for 100 years. And now we're getting to the point where we're engineering solutions. And that's, we need people to do that. We need educated people who know how to do advanced manufacturing, advanced engineering in these kinds of fields. So we need to invest as a nation in that. Similarly, we mentioned, about the hype and the a lot of hype that's around the quantum technologies field. We need smart folks on the government side. I'm sitting in the middle of the physics department at the Air Force Academy right now. That's a perfect place where we should be training new officers that are going into the Department of the Air Force and Space Force in quantum information science and quantum technology, so that at least they don't have to be experts in it, but they at least need to know how to separate the hype from the reality and the wheat from the chaff, and understand as technologists and military strategists how to best use it. So I think there's a two-way conversation that needs to be developed there.
Yeah, great points. Joel, I'm going to give you the last word here. Joel has certainly reinforced the importance of wargaming and exercises that go along with Laura's point about testing out these capabilities in real world environments. And certainly those kinds of capabilities also lend themselves to increasing the knowledge and understanding about the capabilities, about the technology. It has an educational component too. Laura has hinted at the fact that two guys in a garage aren't gonna cut it. Meaning, to me, that we probably have a limited supply of talent that is actually skilled at developing these capabilities for broad government and commercial uses. What are your thoughts on all of this, and specifically the education and skills that might be needed to move us into a future with quantum?
Yeah, Laura, I guess you reminded me when you talked about two guys in a garage. I guess those are the guys that get in their truck, two guys in a truck, and go around also to sell their wares. But anyway, yeah, the question about what kind of education and skills are going to be needed here in the future with quantum, certainly the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are STEM is a great place to start. And of course, we've got shortages there normally. And so we really need to have that build up. But like any other discipline, there's numerous additional skill sets and educational areas that are going to be required. Everything from human resources and budgeting and finance, traditional business operations. It's not just technology. But who knows, in the future going forward, there may even be some sort of a quantum information science degree that is offered in universities. And for sure, going into the future, everyone, as witnessed today at Davos, people are getting immersed a little bit in what it's going to take in quantum that they need to be thinking about in the future. But there needs to be a basic understanding of quantum technologies going forward. And, thus there's really a proper mix of education, outreach, understanding, training, and preparation that's going to be required of all of us going forward. And when Joel mentioned United States Air Force Academy, my goodness, maybe a future Miss America will come out of there at some point or be able to talk for part of a talent, of a quantum information science type experience or degree that she would have. And we're very proud of Miss Colorado the other night being selected as Miss America, a pilot, an Air Force Academy grad. Anyway, I'll end on that high note.
Thank you so much, General Raduege. Absolutely agree that having more notable and noticeable role models out there who can help bring forward the importance of these kinds of emerging technologies, the critical nature of them, and have the degrees in the background to support future advancements of those technologies, whether it's from a policy standpoint, whether it's from a warfighting operational user standpoint, or whether it's from a technology development standpoint, is really important. We've got to increase the overall education across the board and the skills that are needed to really drive these technologies. I want to thank you, General Raduege, for being a part of this panel. Also, Dr. Joel Mozer, Laura Thomas, thank you so much for your really insightful points of view about the critical implications of quantum technologies, the applications of quantum technologies that are very real, very much in front of us, particularly in the area of sensing and timing, key distribution, certainly in the future, more and more quantum computing, encryption capabilities that we've got to get and stay in front of are all very critical. But as Laura, you point out, we need that demand signal from the government. These rapidly emerging technologies that have such an important impact on our national security have to be driven by government interest and investment, by government demand to really apply these technologies to meet our national security needs and fill gaps, prevent us from the threats that could be posed, for example, with a day without GPS. So we've got to get after these things. We've got to experiment. We've got to war game them, as Joel points out. And we've got to fundamentally focus on building out a supply chain in the U.S. With U.S. industry partners, a defense industry base that can really bring these capabilities to bear for all of our national security needs and certainly for our future prosperity. So thank you again for being a part of this, for being a part of America Future Series, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you, Kim.